Why does spraying in CS2 feel so bad? What are the issues that people have with CS2 compared to CSGO? Everyone seems to agree that mechanics feeling good are the most important things about the game. We can all agree that the smoke changes, the Molotov visibility updates, the UI refreshes, buy menu upgrades, and nade smoke visibility updates are all much improved over CSGO. But the biggest flaws seem to be these two things: spraying and perceived lag. I believe that spraying, quote, feeling bad is not because of Source 2 or the big boogeyman of subtick, but it's actually how the game relays information back to you compared to CSGO. Let me explain. At the end of this video, I'll summarize why I think spraying feels so much worse, even though the gun mechanics haven't changed. CS2 is meant to be a port of CSGO, and while it clearly isn't a one-to-one port, it's meant to be an upgrade to the game, meaning it should feel better, not worse, to play. The only reason that people care so much about these things is that the game has a once-in-a-generation quality that other games just don't have. If there were changes like this made to a game like Overwatch that are similar from CSGO to CS2, most people probably wouldn't care after about a month or so. But CS2 has to live up to a much higher standard than other games. Let's take a look at spraying specifically. I'll be using the AK for these examples as it's the most commonly used gun and mainly what people complain about, as it's admittedly very hard to learn how to spray compared to the M4s. If we take two no-spread AK sprays and overlay them, we can see that the sprays are identical, with the only differences being how the game is portraying bullet holes in the wall. And more on this later, as it's extremely important to my point. Since this video is free on the internet, I'm going to take a quick word from the sponsor of today's video. Skin Club is the best adult case opening site on the internet. Skin Club lets you open cases for real cash with my promo code in the description. Aren't happy with what you got out of a case? Skin Club lets you write it along into an upgrader so you can get your value back with just a little bit of luck. You can deposit easily with all the methods that you see on screen with easy withdrawals. You can also battle against other players or split the difference so that everybody wins. Head on over to Skin Club with my link in the video description for a deposit bonus. Thank you to Skin Club for sponsoring today's video. So if the guns between the two games have the exact same spray pattern, we have to talk about player preference. As someone who's experimented with hundreds of view models, crosshairs, resolutions, and whenever I can try to milk the most performance out of myself, I'd like to say that some things like switching between different view model settings or changing left to right hand really messes up your spray. Anyone who's tried to do this knows that in the first 4 to 5 sprays after you make a change, it'll feel completely different. And it's because we train ourselves to understand the peripheral timing of how the gun model moves to lock into the spray mentally. Whether you do this consciously or not, everybody does it the same. This is where I decided to check the animations of both CSGO and CS2 with a 240 FPS video and count the animation frames to see if anything's different. I did this because we need to rule out every possibility as to why things feel different going from one game to the next. I noticed a few things. For one, in CSGO the animation works like this. Frame 0 of the cycle is the gun resetting back to the original position. The next frame shows a muzzle flash, and then about 3 frames later, at 240 FPS, this is about 12 milliseconds, the bullet counter in the bottom left decreases by 1. In CS2, these all happen on the same frame, leading to a smoother and more consistent animation. The animations are practically the same, except for the gun model rising more in CSGO compared to CS2, but I don't think that the gun animation has much to do with why spraying feels worse. But something came into view that I'd never really thought about before while I was doing this part of the research process. Do you notice how in CSGO there's a subtle but obviously present white dot that appears on every bullet surface that you shoot of your last bullet in the spray? One of the first lessons I got on learning to spray was to track this white dot, as it shows where your last bullet was, and therefore where your spray is heading relative to your target, so that you can recover from a bad spray execution to at least pull it back to maybe get one more bullet in the enemy. If we take a look at how CS2 shows these bullets in the wall, things start to make much more sense. There are really two types of sprays that CS players need to master. Sprays where you should get the kill versus sprays where you really need to fight and readjust to something that wasn't expected. In fights where you should win, usually you start the spray on an easy target who isn't looking at you or something similar to this, to where you're given the best chance to perform the skill of spray pattern control. When in this situation, sprays feel good, besides the delay problem, which I'll talk about in a little bit. The other type of fight is much more dynamic and much more common, and there's something different about these fights in CS2 from CSGO. You're tasked with killing someone who you weren't expecting to peak in the way that you thought, meaning that you have to adjust your spray midway through to have the best chance of winning the engagement. Here's some example footage in a deathmatch server that shows the bullet impacts in blood properly. Take a look at how hard it is to tell while the footage is at full speed where my bullets are actually going in dynamic gunfights. If the game had no screen shake, it might be easier to discern how you're actively missing, But with screen shake, it almost feels like you're shooting blanks unless you're so close to the target that it's impossible to miss. This is where it started to make sense to me. The reason that CS2 feels so bad is primarily this, and it's much harder to tell where your shots are landing versus CSGO, where it was very obvious. The visual clutter and brightness of the game and lack of boldness of the bullet holes behind somebody make it so much harder to see if you're missing your shots or not. So you end up having to blindly trust your mechanics and hope for an accidental spray to land properly. One of the reasons that pro players like Donk have such amazing sprays in pro matches is that his mechanics are so drilled into his hands that it's very rare to see him whiff a spray. While this can't be said for the average player who has to deal with bad mechanics, lag, and people moving in crazy ways that pro players don't move in. This also explains why people have the opinion of tapping feels alright, but sprays feel horrible. How could this be possible when tapping is really just the first bullet of your magazine? When someone's tapping, they're going for a shot that isn't relatively hard to hit, but hard to spray. People who know when to tap pick these engagements wisely, as most of the time tap kills are won with super confidence on an easy to read target. And rarely people who are good like Nico choose to tap when the fight is not heavily in their favor. This is why Nico doesn't go for one taps when sitting on sandbags in Banana. He chooses the spray, since he needs to have the maximum chance of at least readjusting to body shot the enemy if he whiffs the first bullet. Another piece of this puzzle is kill delay. One of the things that people have been investigating in CS2 is the time for the game itself to report visibly to the player when a kill has been successful. In this video by Danny Loic33, he uses two servers to show with similar ping how much more end-to-end latency appears from shooting to possible kill registration in your head. Let's say your reaction time is 200 milliseconds, below average at best, but good enough for this example. Spray transfers work by you reacting to the first kill, then transferring to the second player on your screen as fast as possible. If the first kill in CS2 takes longer with or without higher ping than CSGO did, as Danny shows in his video, that means that you literally have more time before your brain can start to react to the first kill, meaning you're slower to move to the next target, thus making it much harder to perform this skill. Spray transfers require the tiniest of margins to pull off, and I believe that the reason you don't see them as much is it's literally harder to predict when to flick to the next target. And 50 milliseconds of difference is enough to move your player model into the second enemy's reaction window to get traded. Usually now, spray transfers seem to only happen when the second player and beyond are completely not ready to trade. While in CSGO, people were getting spray transfers on fully ready and aware players who had to react suddenly, but were still ready with their guns out. This is all pretty anecdotal though, since it's downstream of the spray issue. Here's what I believe will fix CS2 sprays. First, the netcode needs to be further optimized to remove delay from player input to game output on your kill outcome. This was possible in CSGO and should be possible in CS2. Source 2 is a modern, high-performing engine running on NASA computers on both the client and server end, only held up by the photons and electrons that carry packet information. If you want to watch my last video talking about cheating in CS2, I do an explanation of how the simplest netcodes worked in the past that allowed for a very clean and optimized multiplayer kill feedback in Quake 3, which was the gold standard at the time for quickly performing netcode implementations. Secondly, and probably more importantly, the wall feedback of where your shots are currently going has to be boosted in order to be high contrast to the map. On most maps, the visual clutter and brightness of the backdrop that a player is residing in front of is too much for the bullet holes to stand out to the player shooting, leading to a feeling of just not knowing where your bullets are landing while you spray. Bullet holes aren't dark enough to see for the average player since they're so washed out. This makes the player feel as if they're shooting blindly, using only their mouse feel to know where the bullets land, which is extremely hard to do. As you can see from these clips though, maps like Nuke actually have really good player feedback because most of the surfaces are either metal or very high contrast to the dark bullet holes. But maps like Dust 2, Inferno, Ancient, it's almost impossible to see your bullets in a lot of very common spray angles. If top pros agree with me on this, there's something more that can be done by Valve to improve how bullet holes in the most recent shot appear. The size of the holes should be increased with higher contrast between the environment, and I think that they should be fully blacked out with minimal dust spray. If we're gonna still have the dust spray, it should be toned down or made much darker and shorter. Either one I think would be a good change. Thank you for watching, and consider subscribing if you like this type of video.